Capitol Report is a production of Senate Media Services.
This week, Senator Erin Murphy highlights provisions in the state and local government budget, and Senator Jim Carlson describes efforts to make it easier to vote. Plus, the People of Color and Indigenous Caucus celebrates their accomplishments. Stay tuned for this week's Capitol Report. Welcome to this week's program. I'm Shannon Loehrke. The budget bill for state and local government offers one-time investments in cybersecurity, creates several commissions and task forces, and provides salary increases for constitutional officers and agency heads. Senator Erin Murphy, chair of the Senate State and Local Government Committee, joins me now to talk more about it. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, Shannon. It's good to see you.
So in our increasingly connected digital lives, the dangers that are posed by hackers accessing our personal information are growing. Cybersecurity breaches recently in Minneapolis and Rochester come to mind for the school districts. This budget will provide grants to state, local, and tribal governments to address cybersecurity risks. Are these investments expected to be sufficient?
You know, I am delighted with the work that we have done in state and local government and veterans. Let's not forget veterans as a part of this committee. And cybersecurity is a key focus of a number of members of the legislature. And we took decisive action in order to allow local governments and schools, among others, to take action. And I do believe we are making a very strong investment for the protection of people's data and the privacy of that data. And we'll monitor that. And if we need to come back to it, we will. We know that this is a changing environment and people's data matters and the privacy matters, whether you're a school district, a local unit of government, or for your family. And so we understand how important this is, and we're going to monitor it and make sure that we're doing our job.
A provision that garnered some controversy involves the creation of a 13-member State Emblems Redesign Commission that is going to be charged with developing a new design for the official state seal and for the official state flag. The law reads, quote, "The designs must accurately and respectfully reflect Minnesota's shared history, resources, and diverse cultural communities." Why is now the time to make this change?
Minnesotans are abundantly clear that we are a state that is in the process of changing. We always are, and we are. And the question about our flag, the state seal, the emblem, and our flag has been one that people have raised over and over again. And I think we've just reached that point where people say, yep, it's time. It's time for us to look at our history. It's time for us to look at who we are and what that means, and to see if we can come up with a design. And the Commission's choice could include retaining the flag that we have now, but should we? Is it time? And the legislature said, yes, it's time for us to do this, and we'll see what they come up with. But I think it is a beautiful time for us to be thinking about who we are, what that means, and how we reflect that in our emblem and our flag.
And it should be said that our emblem and flag are sort of dated looking, and other states have modernized the look. It's almost as, it can be considered a branding type issue, yes?
Well, people who are experts in flags, and I am not, recognize that our flag does not meet current standards in terms of design, attraction, or brand. And I'm excited to see what they come up with. And I will also say that there are young people all over the state who are very invested in this question through the work of their educators. So I think it's going to be a great civics experiment and a great civics experience, as well as a very important part of Minnesotans' continued future, the legacy and what we bring to that, but what we're building for our future.
Let's talk about some of the legislative task forces, councils, and offices that are being created. This is just a few of them, but the first I want to talk about is a Council of LGBTQIA2S+, which encompasses lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, questioning, intersex, asexual, and two-spirit people. What is this council's mission?
You know what we're doing? We're expanding the table of inclusion when we think about the work of our state government. And they will serve, like we have seen with other councils, an important role of helping shaping the thinking of policymakers, of the executive branch, and making sure that the work that we're doing includes everybody, that we're not missing people. And often we miss people because they're not in our consciousness. And so this council, which I think is really important for the moment of time that we're in, will assure that we are asking ourselves the right questions, that we're considering the lives in an inclusive way of Minnesotans, and we're building policy that responds to that.
According to the State Demographic Center, by 2030, which is not that far away, more than 1 in 5 Minnesotans will be over the age of 65. To that end, the legislature is also creating a legislative task force on aging. What will this group be studying?
So I think it is right for us, knowing that demographic point, to make sure that we have built the systems, if you will, for people to age in place and age well. We spend a lot of time talking about nursing homes, about assisted living, about how people are going to get the care that they need. But that's just one slice of people in the way that we lead our lives. And people who are turning 65 are different than what we conceive of people at 65 maybe 30 years ago. People are still working. They're still very active in their lives. They're still driving. They're still participating fully in our communities. So are we built for that? That's the question that they need to answer. Are we prepared for a population of that size to age? We need to answer that question. But also, are we taking full advantage of the wisdom that they have to offer us to make space for that as well? I'm really proud of the work that we've done in state and local government and veterans, because we are thinking about our government as an instrument that serves the people, and we're making sure that it's well funded, but it's also preparing for a future for all of us.
People who visit the Capitol on a tour are typically asked when they get into the rotunda to look up at this little tiny dot up in the sky, the Electrolier, which is the chandelier that hangs. It was one of the first pieces of electrification like that when the Capitol opened. And historically, it is only on for Statehood Day, May 11th, and for the opening day of the legislative session. But this law changes that so that now the orb will be illuminated anytime the legislature is in session, so quite frequently in the winter and the spring. Why the change?
So this was a good idea that came from a colleague in the House, and it came kind of late to us, and I love it. And I will say that that orb, as you say, the Electrolier, it's a special part of the state's capital. It's a special part of Minnesota when it's lit. It is a beacon for the North Star, if you will. And when I think about it and looking up, just like when I look up at the sky and see a sky full of stars and light, I'm inspired by that. And I feel the very same way about the Electrolier. And so while some may view it as making something special less special, I think it is bringing something that's very special to life on a regular basis so that people can see it whenever they're visiting.
A political environment is not necessarily conducive to handling the salaries of elected people. This budget increases the salaries for the state's constitutional officers and for state agency heads, and I think it kind of takes this problem away. How will salary determinations be handled from here going forward?
You know, we have two compensation councils in Minnesota, one that deals with the pay of legislators like me, and one that deals with the pay of our constitutional officers and the agency heads. And that compensation council that deals with constitutional officers makes a recommendation every couple of years, and those recommendations have largely been ignored by the legislature. I think our constitutional officers up until now have gotten one pay increase in 20 years' time, and that's unfortunate. They have important work to do, and just like anybody else, their salaries should keep up and be commensurate with inflation and the work that we're doing. So I was really happy that in this budget we were able to find space to make sure that our those officers are getting the pay that they deserve for the work that the important work that they're doing for the people of Minnesota. That council will continue to do its work. We've reformatted it so they can come back. And I do think that it is time for that council to make some decisions, and we can allow that work to stand, just like we did with the legislature. We took that decision out of the hands of the legislature. Minnesotans did that by voting for a ballot initiative. We gave it over to a council. We have no say. We don't touch, we don't talk to. We are blocked off from the work of that council, and they make a decision about the salaries for the people who serve in the legislature, and I think that's right. It shouldn't be politicized, and if it is in our hands, we'll never do the pay increases. That impacts who can serve. We want people to come to this work not because they can afford it, because they're well off. not because they can afford it because they're retired, but because they have an important something to add to the policymaking of Minnesotans. And if the pay doesn't support a family or the place where you are in your life, then they're going to say no to that opportunity, and we lose talent. We want that talent. Pay is important.
One final question before we go. The new law also stipulates that if the Senate does not reject a governor's commissioner appointment within 60 legislative days, then that appointment is essentially confirmed. Is this a remedy to what happened in Governor Walz's first term when the Senate was led by the Republicans, and at a later, several years into various terms, people were let go?
Our responsibility is to advise and to consent. We need to do that. And over many years now, the confirmation of commissioners has become a political tool. And it's not just in this last term. It's been happening with increased frequency. And using then we might not confirm as a tool to leverage something from a governor that they might not otherwise be willing to do. We should restore our responsibility to advise and consent, but take away the impulse to make that a leveraging point so that whoever gets elected governor is able to assemble the team that can lead and lead with confidence without the fear of being fired for a political purpose that is not necessarily related to their work. That's what we did.
Senator Erin Murphy, it's always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Members of the People of Color and Indigenous Caucus took a moment at the end of session to highlight their legislative accomplishments.
POCI issues are Minnesota issues. When we focus on these issues, we often talk about the disparities that we have around our state. And I often say that when we have these surveys about the best states to live in, the best states to raise your families, the best state to have an education, the best places for a job, Minnesota always ranks very high. But when you drill down on those numbers, what we find is that there are stark disparities. And in most cases, the folks you see up here, our communities, we represent the communities that fall within those disparities. And so what we're always trying to do is how do we fix those disparities? Because when we fix those disparities, we have better communities. We led the session off focused on education. We know that when we have better educational outcomes, we have better communities. We know that when we have health equity, we have better community. We know that when we have public safety and criminal justice reform, we have better communities. We know that when we have equity and economic development, we create jobs, and we have better community. We have achieved many of the goals that we set forth this session, and you'll hear from some of our members that will talk specifically to those bills.
In education, we created an ethnic studies curriculum that is going to help our students understand each other better, build that awareness within our communities, and I'm so excited that Senator Swadzinski was able to do that. We have Indigenous Peoples Day. We're allowing our students to wear eagle feathers at graduation and wear their sacred tobacco. Those are just some of the simple little things that we are doing for our communities of color, as well as non-exclusionary discipline and, of course, the new literacy program so that all of our students are reading at their age-appropriate way. There's so much more in the bills that we have around public safety, so limits on no-knock warrants by Senator Verbaden, and that bias crime bill by Senator Mohammed. Health care, we were intentional about making sure that our communities, especially our communities of color that have had the worst health care outcomes, are getting those supports. So we have the paid family leave authored by Senator Mann in the Senate, and Minnesota Care for all of our undocumented Minnesotans as well.
We've done a lot, and we did it by ensuring that we were focused on inclusivity and breaking down the systemic barriers that Black and brown Minnesotans face here every day. We focused on investing in our communities to, as you heard, protect our housing, increase our access to education, keeping our communities safe, healthcare, and legalizing cannabis in a way that did not leave us behind because so many members of our communities have been hurt by the war on drugs.
The DFL majorities in the Senate and the House have made a number of changes pertaining to elections and voting, including the restoration of voting rights once people have completed incarceration and automatic voter registration. Other changes were included in the omnibus state government and elections budget bill. Senator Jim Carlson is the chair of the Senate Elections Committee, and he joins me now. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much, Shannon.
So Minnesota enjoys high voter turnout, as you know, which means that they know how to vote. What are maybe just a few changes that Minnesotans may notice, thanks to this budget bill, the next time they visit the polls?
Oh, there's so many things that we've done. We've increased the ability for people to register to vote. Now we have the automatic registration, so there's going to be a lot fewer people that will have to register on election day. We've increased the number of days that you can vote. We've designated a Sunday before. We've designated more abilities to do absentee voting at your place of your county and places like that. So there's a lot of new changes that people will welcome. And the fact of the matter is not only do we have high turnout because we're just oriented that way, but people really trust Minnesota's elections.
The new law seeks to protect election workers from intimidation or interference. This was of concern in the last election. What mechanisms have been put into place to tackle this and make people feel safer?
Well, we've actually added some crime if you threaten workers. We've had reports of people being followed home, being called and harassed. We also make sure that we don't supply information on all the election judges. You can get information yet as has been provided before, but now it's more protected. Plus the voters themselves are a little bit more protected. We don't allow, we've always had that where we don't allow police at the polls unless they're voting. So there are things like that just make it a little bit more comfortable to walk in and vote.
College students are an interesting cohort to try to get involved in elections. They frequently lack a permanent residence, and often they're more concerned about their studies than they are the state of the state or the nation. How does this new law attempt to get college students more involved in the voting process?
One of the things about being registered in a new place is you have to live there for 20 days. So we make sure that colleges provide the names and addresses, even off campus, of college students so they can be approached and be registered to vote. And of course, Minnesota allows college students to vote either by absentee at their home address, or they can register at college and vote from that address. So it's making it a lot easier for college students to become registered and also show up to vote.
Provides them more options, for sure. Current law allows people to take time off from work on election day, but this new law now further expands that time frame. People will now have the right to be absent from work to vote during the 46 days prior to election day. Who will be helped by this change?
Every voter will be helped because they can now choose when they want to go in and vote. But also there's a little benefit for businesses too, because not everybody has to vote on election day and leave work. So they can work it out with their employees to perhaps still get coverage and still allow everyone to get out and vote. And really, there's no difference between letting them off on another day and letting them off on election day, other than the fact that some election days you have a long line. So there's a lot of congestion at the polls. So this is going to help everyone.
Yeah, so ideally then, because there won't be the long lines, often that's what takes so long to go vote, is if your polling place is super busy.
Exactly.
Yeah. One item that garnered quite a bit of dissent from Republicans is a provision that will add Minnesota to the National Popular Vote Compact. What is this, and why is it a good idea for Minnesota to join this compact?
The compact allows, or let's say the intent, is to have the winner of the election, the presidential candidate that gets the most votes, to be elected president. We've had instances where that hasn't happened, where someone has gotten a greater popularity vote and still didn't earn to get to be president. And it still uses electors, so it doesn't eliminate the elector system, but what it does do is everyone that signs that compact, or every state that signs that compact, as soon as you get 270 electoral votes, then all of those in the compact have agreed to put their votes for the person that gets the most votes in the nation. And what that does for Minnesota, it means that your vote counts, whether you voted for the winner in Minnesota or not. And it gets added to other states. And it can make a difference as to whether the president gets elected by the most votes or not. And in this case, I think that's real important. And contrary to some criticisms, going to a state with a small population still gets added to that total for that particular candidate. So we think that it won't be just the so-called battleground states that get visits by presidents, presidential candidates.
This could be, if enough states are in this compact, this could be a significant change then to who wins the presidential election.
Could be. When we say significant, it's only happened a couple of times, and so yes, it'll make a difference. I think it's the right thing to do to have the person who gets the most votes win the contest.
There was a fair amount of discussion during the last session about ranked choice voting, which had a pretty big impact in one of Alaska's elections where they use it. It was ultimately left out of the bill, but the law does require now that the Secretary of State will conduct a study looking into engagement, education, and election system improvements, quote, which can include but is not limited to assessing ranked choice voting. The Secretary of State study is to be completed by June 30th of 2025. How do you view this task force, and do you believe that there is a role in Minnesota, in more Minnesota elections, some cities do, for ranked choice voting in the future?
I believe there is. Now, what I need to do is go back to see how this got started, because Hennepin and Ramsey already have it in their counties. And there have been a lot of reactions to it from new voters, from people who are new Minnesotans, from the demographics that are not necessarily the high turnout voters. And we had, and I can tell you this, that we had a lot of discussion about the two things or three things that were involved in this. One of them is whether we should allow all locations, that includes county school districts and other statutory cities, to have ranked choice voting. And the problem was that the Secretary of State told us we aren't ready to count those, because the states that have ranked choice right now, they count differently than we do. So we need to figure out technically how we can count it. Plus, then we also said we need to find out whether this is something that people want. And so we decided to skip the what we call the local option, allowing everybody to do it, and do the study with a task force that is going to report on just how much do people want ranked choice voting. So it's not a given, and that's why it says not limited to.
Right. Perfect. One more question before we go. There has been a tradition in Minnesota that election law changes are done with bipartisan support. Senator Mark Curran, who is the Republican lead on your committee, said in a statement that this bill, which did not have Republican support, will make elections, quote, weaker, riskier, less transparent, and less trustworthy. So how do you counter that? How would you respond to constituents who agree with him?
Well, one thing is that we did consider having bipartisan support on bills, and I need to specifically focus you to SF3, which was Liz Bolton's election bill. And that's a bill, and I announced right away that if we have all five, because Senate can only have 5 sponsors, if we have all 5 from one party, that bill will get a lower priority to be heard than one that has bipartisan support. And I put my money where my mouth is, and Liz Bolton entered her bill, it had 5 Democrats on it. So I removed my name, and I let that bill have 1 spot for a Republican. They wouldn't sign on to it, and then at the last minute before we passed it, we had Senator Mitchell sign on in my place. So we tried, and we did add some amendments, and we did have a couple of bills that were sponsored by Republicans. Senator Coleman had 2 bills in the final final roll-up of our election bills. But we did have, I think it was 78 bills that were referred to our committee, and many of them were provisional ballots or voter ID or other things that we've discussed before, and we've set them aside. So we've had a statewide vote on voter ID, and there wasn't any point in trying to discuss that.
Senator Jim Carlson, we're going to stop here, but I want to thank you so much for taking the time.
Well, thank you, Shannon. This is great. I'm glad to be able to come back here again.
We'd like to close this week's program with some of the images captured throughout the 2023 legislative session, taken by our Senate photographers A.J. Olmscheid and Michelle Jokinen. Join us again next week as we delve into more topics affecting Minnesotans. I'm Shannon Loehrke, and on behalf of all of us at Senate Media Services, thanks for watching.